What is quite certain is that we will have a presidential proclamation which will either specify the extent of reciprocal tariffs which US intends to impose on some countries or the rest of the world.
But what we have seen in the case of India is that India followed the unusual practice of starting with a lot of concessions, which came from the budget. We all know in the budget several duties were dropped.
So I would not be surprised if, as part of the outcome of the negotiations, we do see, at least on a bilateral basis, India lowering its tariffs and US also lowering its tariffs. The next wave of colonization, or you call it any other, use any other term, will really be grab for data.
Yeah.
And certainly this issue will be, to my mind, a contentious issue at the negotiating table. I don't foresee India and China getting into a closer trade relationship through a trade agreement. We really will not be able to withstand import competition in the manufacturing sector from China. For a country like India, which is true for a large number of other developing countries as well, multilateralism is the best way forward.
Hello and welcome to this special discussion where we are going to speculate. At the moment, we can only speculate on what President Donald Trump might throw at the rest of the world and also throw at India in particular tomorrow in terms of imposing tariffs, trade tariffs. And this is something which is on a daily basis, 24/7, has occupied countries around the world in terms of in what way the Trump tariffs might disrupt their economies, respective economies, disrupt the growth momentum, disrupt other macroeconomic factors such as inflation, etc., trade deficits, trade surplus, as the case may be. So we have today to basically to unpack this whole the suspense around the Trump tariffs. We have with us today an international trade expert, Abhijit Das. He's not only a international trade expert, he is also in the past been a negotiator at the WTO on India's behalf, and he has been the head of a WTO Center for WTO Studies, which is also quasi-government kind of controlled. So, Abhijit, welcome to our show. We needed somebody like you to tell us, to build scenarios for us as to what might happen in the next 48 hours. How will the world get hit by Trump tariffs? How will India get hit by Trump tariffs? So Abhijit, why don't you just begin by telling us what do you expect that might happen? Donald Trump, who keeps changing his statements every day, of course, but the latest one that he's come up with some 20 hours ago, yesterday, was that he will be much kinder to his trading partners. How do you interpret Trump being much kinder to his trading partners to begin with? And then we can carry forward the discussion. Yes, Abhijit.
Thank you, Venu, for having me on your program. It's very difficult to guess what is likely to happen later in the day today or early tomorrow morning by Indian time. But what is quite certain is that we will have a presidential proclamation which will either specify the extent of reciprocal tariffs which US intends to impose on some countries or the rest of the world, or we might have an announcement that the reciprocal tariffs, these are the levels for various countries, and the tariffs will be gradually rolled out. So there are a large number of possibilities. President Trump saying that he'll be kinder to some trading partners, the way I interpret it is that there could be multiple interpretations. One interpretation could be that, well, in some products, the trading partners' tariffs, let's assume, is 100% on a particular product. So Trump might not end up imposing that 100% tariff on that particular country. That could be one possibility. The second possibility could be that on some countries he might impose a lower level of reciprocal tariff.
Okay.
Third possibility could be that on certain sectors, the level of reciprocal tariffs might be lower than what he imposes in respect of other sectors. So there could be multiple scenarios for interpreting President Trump's statement that he might be kinder to some of the trading partners.
Okay. So Abhijit, going beyond what might happen in the next 24 hours, I'm more interested in the broader negotiations that India has entered with the United States. Now, the government is calling it a multi-sectoral bilateral trade agreement. Although some people are describing it as a free trade agreement, but I heard the foreign affairs, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Jai Shankar, say that it's not a free trade agreement; it's a bilateral, multi-sector bilateral trade agreement. So, what exactly do you make of this? Does it mean that if it's a bilateral trade, if it is not a free trade agreement, does it mean that India will be then committed to offer similar tariffs to other countries like Japan, China, whoever, the European Union? What is your sense?
Okay, there are again different possibilities. First and foremost, the terminology multi-sectoral bilateral trade agreement is not a recognized terminology in international trade, certainly not at the WTO. What the WTO recognizes is something called a free trade agreement or an interim arrangement leading to a free trade agreement. Then the WTO has certain benchmarks how to assess whether an agreement is a free trade agreement or not. One of the key benchmarks is that the coverage of trade should be substantially all trade. Again, substantially all trade is not clearly defined, but the trading partners have the flexibility to, let us say, if 90% of the trade is covered, or 85% of the trade is covered, or even if 80% of the trade is covered, normally that is treated as having met that threshold.
Okay.
So that's one thing to bear in mind on free trade.
So you're saying this is not a. So you're saying that bilateral trade agreement is a term not recognized in the WTO, under the WTO, right?
Absolutely, but that gives the negotiators some flexibility to decide the overall legal architecture of the agreement which they arrive at. The flexibility would be the following: if it's a free trade agreement, then tariffs on substantially all trade will have to be eliminated.
Okay.
But that tariff concession will be extended just between India and US. India will be under no obligation to extend that tariff concession, nor will US be under any obligation to extend that tariff concession to a third party.
Even in a bilateral trade agreement.
In a free trade agreement.
But not if it is a bilateral trade agreement, then will India be obliged to extend it to other countries?
If it's a bilateral trade agreement, which does not qualify for a free trade agreement, then strictly under WTO rules, India will have to extend the concessions to rest of the WTO membership under a provision called most favored nation treatment, which requires countries to give non-discriminatory treatment to its trading partners. So if the BTA between India and US does not qualify for being a free trade agreement, then under WTO rules, it will have to be extended multilaterally on a non-discriminatory basis to rest of the WTO membership. But today's scenario, when WTO rules are being totally flouted, we can't rule out the possibility that there could be some sort of an understanding that, well, we will extend the tariff concessions just between India and US. We really don't know what the final legal
So
architecture will be.
yeah. So basically, you're saying that the way the world is moving, world trade arrangements are moving, and the way WTO is being disregarded. Let's put it bluntly. You're saying there's a possibility that this might be a new practice where bilateral trade agreement concessions are not extended to other countries on a most favored nation basis. That's what you're saying. It's possible, right?
That possibility does exist, but if many
Okay.
countries start following that practice, then that would imply a complete collapse of the multilateral trading regime, which would
Okay.
be really an unfortunate thing to happen.
Okay. So, Abhijit, the next question is, which a lot of people have been asking. Normally, in a trade negotiation, you you start from a maximalist bargaining position, and then you both sides or if there are more than two sides, they start bargaining and concessions and start giving concessions and receiving concessions. The bargaining begins from a maximalist position. But what we have seen in the case of India uh, is that India uh, followed the unusual practice of of starting with a lot of concessions, which came from the budget. We all know in the budget several duties were dropped, uh, clearly with a view to impress the U.S. establishment, the Trump establishment. Uh, Many concessions were given in both tariff and non-tariff. Uh, and the latest one is, of course, the removal of 6% service tax, what is called the Google tax. Uh, Now, and some agriculture products have also been included in the initial unilateral concession that India gave much before the negotiations even began. Like agriculture products like bourbon whiskey, or similarly on autos, on EVs, electric vehicles, uh, and also other kinds of concessions, very, very critical, such as dilution of the legislation in Parliament, which holds the supplier of civil nuclear power equipment liable in the event of an accident that may occur in India. So that's a big concession which has been offered by India. Have you, as a negotiator, how do you view this rather unorthodox practice where India unilaterally gave a number of concessions to impress the other side? And do you expect that the other side would really reciprocate? Because Trump believes in starting from a maximalist position, and that's exactly some of his advisors, past advisors, have also said. I was listening to a, a, a comment by one of his former advisors in his earlier tenure, and he said that Trump believes in starting from maximalist bargaining position. So which we are seeing now. So how do you view this?
Venu, if we look at uh, India's behavior at the multilateral negotiating table of both GATT and WTO, it's replete with instances when India gave absolutely one sided concessions without extracting any concession in return.
Okay.
It goes back to, for example, let's say 1989, April, when
Yeah.
we conceded huge ground by agreeing to the US demand to negotiate standards of IP protection. We got
Okay.
nothing in return.
Mhm.
Similarly, if we come to the Doha round, there were instances when supposedly for creating an amiable negotiating environment, we gave one-sided concessions which were not reciprocated by the other countries, by the developed countries. So this is part of our mindset, if I can say,
Mhm.
that we end up giving one-sided concessions and we do not get uh, commensurate benefits. Having said that, in this instant case of our bilateral negotiations with US, we really need to see what the final outcome will be.
Yeah.
I'm sure as some of the seasoned negotiators are handling this negotiation on from the side of Commerce Ministry, they
Yeah.
would have realized the perils of giving one-sided concessions to US. So maybe when the negotiations progress, they should ideally leverage these concessions which we have given in advance to
Okay.
get something in return. And let's bear in mind that in the BTA negotiations, these cannot be just about getting rid of reciprocal tariffs if the US were to impose the reciprocal tariffs on us tonight.
Yeah. Yeah.
The
Yeah.
BTA negotiation should ideally also involve not only getting rid of reciprocal tariffs, but also getting US to lower tariffs on products of our export interests, for example, textiles and clothing and leather.
Okay.
So that entire mix, we will have to see what how the negotiations progress. And one final point on giving concessions in advance. This again is a strategy which developed countries use to hook the other side onto the negotiating table.
Okay. Okay. They also, you're saying that as a hook, they also offer concessions. Is that what you're
Uh,
saying?
in very rare instances, they have
Okay.
used that strategy as well.
So, so Abhijit, now Trump yesterday made another statement, which is that India, he said India had agreed to substantially bring down tariffs. Now, uh, do you think that India has in informal kind of consultations, they have made this promise, and therefore Trump might be kinder to India uh, in the next whatever few weeks and months until the bilateral trade agreement is fully sealed. Do you expect that with India there might be a slightly different approach by the from the US compared to say other countries that US might be negotiating with?
Venu, there are two parts to your question. First part is whether India has given a commitment that it will be substantially lowering its tariffs.
I mean, I'm just quoting Trump. I mean,
Exactly,
yeah,
exactly. So we don't know what is the basis of President Trump's statement.
yeah,
But very fact that we are looking at a bilateral trade agreement negotiations, it's quite reasonable to expect both sides to make substantial tariff concessions.
okay,
So I would not be surprised if, as part of the outcome of the negotiations, we do see, at least on a bilateral basis, India lowering its tariffs and US also lowering its tariffs. That is certainly what bilateral trade negotiations aim to do.
okay. So,
So,
yeah,
but what will be the extent of tariff reductions? Those really will be a matter of nitty gritty, nuts and bolts for the negotiators of both sides to hammer out.
okay,
Now, coming to the second part, whether given the fact that we are in a BTA negotiation with US, Trump will be kinder to us, that is very difficult to say. I would not rule out the possibility that uh, for purposes of optics,
mhm,
there could be a slightly gentler treatment of India. But I think that will not be any substantial concession.
yeah,
It might be more for the purposes of optics because US negotiators are very, very hardened professionals. They will not normally give a concession, or they will not be kind just for the sake of being kind. If they are getting something in return, or if they have already got something in return, then maybe they can be slightly, they might concede an inch of a ground somewhere. But normally
okay.
they won't even do that.
So, Abhijit, from your experience of negotiating at the WTO on behalf of India, you have participated in negotiations in the past. What is the biggest pain point for India? There is one view that on the manufacturing side, US really doesn't have much to offer because manufacturing, most of our real needs in terms of manufacturing imports actually come from China, whether you like it or not. Uh, so the US is probably strong in agriculture exports. US wants to push India very hard on opening up uh, to agriculture, and in agriculture, widely analysts widely believe that the dairy sector, the milk dairy sector, and poultry dairy uh, could be very uh, sensitive pain points for India. How do you view the agriculture sector in this
Okay, Venu,
context?
the pain points to my mind would be number one, agriculture. I'll come to agriculture in detail shortly. Number two, it could involve intellectual property rights because that's an area where US has long-standing grievances against India, and an
Yeah,
aspect which got reflected in yesterday's National Trade Estimates 2025 report as well.
yeah,
The third area, which could be very difficult for our negotiators, would be government procurement, where US might want India to extend non-discriminatory treatment in government procurement contracts to it. And
okay.
fourth area could be digital trade, where
The
there could be
data
de-
storage,
data
right?
issue, data storage, free flow of data, maybe mandatory sharing of government data. There are 4 5 very ticklish issues over there. So
Yeah.
to my mind, these four really would be the most difficult issues for the two sides to come to a common ground. Let me
So among
delve
so
a bit.
among these four, Abhijit, which ones do you think? What is the hierarchy of the criticality? I mean, which ones are more serious than the other among these four that you stated?
It's very difficult to put a hierarchy because each of these areas has a very important significance. But agriculture and intellectual property rights, concessions in these areas really will affect literally hundreds of millions of uh,
Okay.
Indians.
Mhm.
And when I say intellectual property rights, there the objective of the US appears to be to use trade agreements as it has done in past trade agreements to make sure that large number of hurdles are put
Mhm.
for delaying or even completely eliminating the possibility of entry of generic pharmaceutical products into the market.
Okay.
But
Can you give
certainly,
yeah? Can you give Abhijit one or two illustrators, one or two examples for both agriculture and for intellectual property rights? I mean,
right.
just so that
Okay.
the viewer understands what we are getting into. Yeah.
Sure. In agriculture, the US interests are in the following products: uh, wheat, rice,
Yeah.
some dairy products, then apple, chicken, cotton, corn, soybeans, walnuts, almonds, and a few nuts and berries.
Yeah.
Now, over here, uh, an
What would be our
additional
average tariff over here at the moment on all these items that you mentioned?
it would really vary from product to product. For example, in dairy, our average bound tariff is around 69%. In fruits and vegetables, our average bound tariff just exceeds 100%.
Okay.
In, let's say, in cotton, etc., it's around 90%. These are bound tariffs. These are
Okay.
not the actual applied customs duties, but these are our bound tariffs. So actual customs duties are much lower, no doubt
Yeah.
about it.
Mhm.
So these are the areas where on tariffs we might face demands from US. But in agriculture, there are a few non-tariff issues as well, where if the recent National Trade Estimate report of yesterday is to go by, Two areas where we could see demands being made. One is on the minimum support price scheme,
Yeah.
where the National Trade Estimates report has clearly flagged their concern on the subsidies, the way they are calculated at the WTO in respect of rice.
Okay. This is the US National Traders. Yeah. Okay.
This is the US National Trade Estimate
Yeah.
report. And clearly, they have a huge concern on this. They have been raising this issue at the WTO. Now, what I find a bit problematic in today's context is sometime in early March, around 10th, 11th March, the lobby group of rice producers in US called US Rice, they made a submission to USTR saying that expressing their concern on India's supposedly high subsidization of rice and saying that this issue should be taken up in bilateral negotiations. They did not talk of India-US bilateral negotiations, but they did make a general statement that subsidization of rice world over should be taken up in bilateral negotiations. So if this becomes an issue in India-US BTA, then we are in a difficult situation. We cannot be in a circumstance where we have to unravel our minimum support price scheme. So clearly, the government is cognizant of the risk over there. The second non-tariff related area in agriculture is in GM products.
Yeah.
Where what the National Trade Estimate report articulates is essentially need to have more predictability in the regulatory regime in India.
Okay.
So these are the issues in agriculture. Coming to pharmaceuticals, essentially the issue centers around patents.
Patents, yeah.
Patents, yeah. Our viewers would be aware, you would be aware, Venu, that the period of patent protection is 20 years.
Yeah.
Thereafter, legitimately, generic medicines can enter the market.
Yeah, and India has been very good at building generic industry. Yeah.
Absolutely. And the importance of the generic pharmaceutical products is simple. They cost 1% or even less than 1% of the patented product. So not only do our generic medicines serve the interest of the Indian sick and poor, they are also a huge help for meeting access to affordable medicines in many countries, including US. US is a very big importer of India's generic pharmaceutical products.
If I'm not mistaken, Indian generics have a 35% market share in the US. Is that right?
Of the generics sold in US, yes.
The generics, just the generic market. Yeah.
Just the generic market, yes, certainly. And there, the difficulty from the US perspective is they find it not a very sustainable situation. So there is a White House report of June 2021, which has very explicitly articulated the need for the US to reduce its reliance on India and China for generics and to diversify manufacturing within US and in other countries.
And this came after COVID. Yeah, right.
This came after COVID. Certainly this came after COVID. So seeing that and keeping that in mind, I don't rule out the possibility of the BTA negotiations creating pain points for us through suggestions from the US side, which would require us to make changes to our patent laws, in particular something called Section 3D of the Patents Act, which prevents something called evergreening of patents. Through this process of evergreening of patents, entry of generic into the market gets delayed. And US has secured such provisions in some of its trade agreements.
Okay. So let me explain, Abhijit, to our for the benefit of our viewers. Evergreening of patents means if a patented drug in the US, manufactured in the US, after 20 years comes out of patents and comes into the generic zone, the US will have the capacity to evergreen the patent, which means it can continue to further exclusively manufacture that for some more years and deny an Indian company from manufacturing it, right? Am I right? In simply put,
That is one way. But
uh,
the crucial thing is the bar on patentability
yeah,
is very low in US. So the same old product with very minor tweaking without any enhanced therapeutic efficacy becomes
yeah,
eligible for a patent in US, whereas in India the bar for patentability is much higher. So
okay,
India will not allow patent of that same old existing
okay,
product with tweaking.
got it. Yeah. So Abhijit, now you've you've explained very well these two very important pain points. One is agriculture products, uh, on which a large section of Indian population uh, is dependent and can get affected. The other is intellectual property rights. Now, these are very critical for India. Now, could these possibly be deal breakers in the course of the negotiations if US pushes very hard on these?
Venu, I wrote an article about a week ago where I pinpointedly said what you are articulating, that these two will be deal breakers. I do not see the government uh, jeopardizing the livelihoods and food security of literally hundreds of millions of farmers in the country. Certainly, there could be a possibility of lowering tariffs, giving concessions on products which we don't produce at all in the country. That I
Yeah,
don't rule out. And any negotiator would do that. And that would be, to my mind, fairly prudent.
yeah,
Similarly, on the issue of patents, if there are demands from the US side that we make changes to our regulatory regime, which will facilitate evergreening of products,
yeah.
then I don't see the government being in a position to agree to those demands. Those demands would have significant adverse consequences for the population at large within the country.
Okay. So essentially, what you're saying, Abhijit, is much more than say industrial tariffs or manufacturing tariffs. These are the other areas where which could really be proved to be deal breakers. I mean, the essentially IP intellectual property is a non-tariff issue, and another possible deal breaker could be correct me if I'm wrong. Uh, the the data storage policy. India is currently envisioning Indian policies envisioning a digital economy where India will have thousands of data factories. This has been articulated by somebody like Mukesh Ambani some time ago in a conversation with the NVIDIA uh, chairman Jensen Huang, where Mukesh Ambani said that India should have thousands of data factories uh, and data should be captured in India, Indian data to be captured in India, which in turn will help generate artificial intelligence. Then artificial intelligence in turn will generate more data. So he was talking about a virtuous cycle of data in India generating, AI products and AI products generating in turn more data. Now, isn't that also pretty critical for India? And if the US big tech insists that they would keep Indian data in their own domain, will that be, according to you, can also be a deal breaker?
Uh, let's remember, Venu, that the last wave of colonization was grab for land.
Yeah,
The next wave of colonization, or you call it any other, use any other term, will
yeah,
really be grab for data.
yeah,
And certainly, this issue will be, to my mind, a contentious issue at the negotiating table. Although President Biden did reverse the US traditional stand on these issues, he had withdrawn the US proposals on these issues at one negotiating forum at the WTO. But I'm not sure whether the Trump administration will continue with that stand of Biden administration. And if it doesn't, then
yeah.
certainly these issues will be at the BTA negotiating table. And India will have to really fight hard, negotiate hard to make sure that it doesn't end up making compromises now, which in a way erodes our ability to leverage the digital sector in future for creating new digital products, for generating jobs, creating incomes. So that way it'll be very important to make sure that we satisfy US, but at the same time, we do not concede ground which compromises our ability for the future. And to my mind, a good landing zone could be something what we have arrived at with UAE in the past
Okay.
on digital, where there was a reasonably good balancing of competing interests.
Okay.
But on these core issues, we did not concede ground on localization, data flows, something called non-discriminatory treatment of digital products, or mandatory sharing of government data. So these four areas are something where the government will have to pay particular attention not to concede ground. And I'm sure the government would be aware of the criticality of these four elements.
So you think that there could be a possible win-win solution, a collaborative kind of solution between the big tech, US big tech, and Indian interests on data localization. You think that possibility exists? That a middle of the road kind of solution? Yeah.
On data localization, I don't think that possibility will exist.
Okay.
But there are other areas where we could concede some ground without having large, long-term damaging implications for us.
Okay. Okay.
Unless there is a legal guarantee that US big tech will invest in data centers in India. And I don't see that happening anytime soon.
Okay. Okay. So I mean, we are all Abhijit, all this conversation that we are having is necessarily within a framework of two nations which are expected of rational behavior. Now, one doesn't know how rational the new Trump administration is in terms of its predictability, etc. I mean that's the view that the rest of the world also has. So what do you think should be India's strategy going forward while India negotiates this bilateral trade multi-sector agreement with the US? Should India also negotiate with other countries as purely as a bargaining ploy, and also as a genuine kind of new trade arrangements, bilateral trade arrangements, since bilateral trade seems to be becoming the order of the day? Should India negotiate with European Union, say with China, because with China things are opening up, as I gather from the news reports, and with Japan, etc. I'm asking you this because, very interestingly, only yesterday, the foreign ministers of Japan, South Korea, and China, they met in Tokyo. In fact, as we speak, they are holding talks to protect their interests following this whole Trump Trump's project of Make America Great Again, and big changes in the trade policy thereof. They are talking about protecting their interests and protecting possibly their supply chain, protecting their economy. Do you think India can also participate in some similar grouping, like Japan, China, South Korea? I'm saying this because it's also very interesting that Japan is part of Quad, and in this vis-a-vis Trump tariffs, they are teaming up with China, and so I find that very interesting because one Quad member is actually so closely talking to China, and India is also a Quad member, very closely talking to US. So there are so many moving parts. How do you see this is evolving.
Okay.
And
One
what
thing,
should India do? What should India do?
right. One thing which seems to be emerging is that US, China, Japan, they are keeping economic interests slightly delinked from security interests.
Exactly.
Otherwise,
Yeah.
otherwise we can't explain Japan and China joining hands on economic matters. Very, very
Exactly.
difficult to explain.
Yeah, and specifically joining hands vis-a-vis in order to counter
Against
the
US.
U.S. trade policy as it is
Ab-
evolving.
Absolutely. So that is one important point we need to bear in mind. However, I don't foresee India and China getting into a closer trade relationship through a trade agreement.
Yeah.
We really will not be able to withstand import competition in the manufacturing sector from China. That's the
India,
reason.
EU, yeah.
India, yes, and we are already engaged in FTA negotiations with EU, with UK. These are making progress, and wisdom would dictate both sides, India, EU, and India, UK, to quickly clinch the deal by not having vaulting ambitions, by maybe lowering their ambitions a bit, realizing what Trump tariffs could do to the rest of the world. So, wisdom really would lie in these FTA negotiations being concluded at the earliest. Of course, protecting the interests from the Indian
Okay.
side, and of course, of the other side as well, giving them some comfort. And that is possible only if the ambitions are moderated. One important point which should be emphasized and which is getting lost in the discussions, write ups everywhere. The tariffs which Trump has imposed and which he will impose later tonight, they are completely illegal. They breach the commitments of the US at the WTO. Whereas India's so called high tariffs are well within our WTO negotiated rights. We should not forget this aspect.
So you're saying that therefore, we should keep emphasizing that the need for WTO and multilateral system to be respected while negotiating this bilateral trade agreement with the US. We should keep emphasizing the importance of the multilateral institution, because the Americans do not are not bothered about the multilateral institutions anymore. So how can India should India join up with other countries to re-emphasize the sanctity of multilateral institutions?
Yes, it will really be, and it should be an integral part of Indian strategy, that while we are negotiating with the US for the bilateral trade agreement, we should keep on emphasizing, and if need be, there are groupings at the WTO which come up with need to give primacy to multilateralism in trade, then we should be part of those groups.
Yeah.
For a country like India, which is true for a large number of other developing countries as well,
Yeah.
multilateralism is the best way forward. It may be weak at this juncture, but for us to get a fair
But
deal,
yeah,
given the
we
power
cannot give up. Yeah.
asymmetries,
Yeah, we
we
should
should
not give
not
up
give
on it.
up
Yeah.
our faith in multilateralism at all.
So, Abhijit, one last question I want to put to you. India's industrial policy in the last, especially Modi's industrial policy, I would say, of Atmanirbharta, Atmanirbhar manufacturing, was emphatically based on, in the last, say, 8-10 years, was based on promoting Indian manufacturing while increasing tariffs on a large number of tariff lines. I'm told more than 3,000 tariff lines. Tariffs were increased, and increasing non-tariff barriers on a large number of items, which former economic advisor Arvind Subramaniam also mentioned in his article in Business Standard, that over 700 items of trade have been India has introduced what is called quality control orders, and all this probably were aimed at helping Indian manufacturing. But as things have panned out, our manufacturing to GDP ratio in the last 10 years actually fallen from 15.5% of GDP to 13% of GDP. Now, what is now all the negotiations that India is doing with Trump and its outcome could actually result in a complete reversal of this industrial policy based on high tariff and non-tariff barriers. And all these tariff and non-tariff barriers, whether you like it or not, were helping India's some of India's big industries, especially input industries, whether it's steel, aluminium, petrochemicals, man-made fibers. So the big industry was being, in some ways, as Bloomberg described it, had been mollycoddled. Now, this coddling of the big industry, following the current negotiating phase with the US and following the outcome of this negotiation, will this stop? Is this a wake up call for India's big industrial sectors, big business families who had been kind of the beneficiaries of protection these 7-8 years?
Okay, let me.
I mean, in the context of the industrial policy, yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Let me try to respond to your question, Venu, from a larger perspective of role of tariffs in the Indian economy.
Yeah. Okay.
If we look at our historical experience over the past 30 odd years, then one thing which emerges very clearly is that, let's say, sector like automobile and auto components, the reason why they thrived was because of tariffs.
Yeah.
If we had lower tariffs on, let's say, automobiles, foreign investment would not have come in.
Yeah.
Similarly, we did not reduce tariffs on components, which in a way helped create a vibrant upstream component industry.
Yeah.
Similarly, in a more recent illustration is mobile handsets. We didn't get the type of interest of foreign investors, let's say 15 years ago, 20 years ago. Simple reason. We had zero tariffs on mobile handsets. Yeah. We started getting interest from the foreign investors only after we imposed tariffs on mobile handsets. So I'm not arguing that you raise tariffs and manufacturing will prosper. No, that's not the case. Manufacturing requires many other elements of the ecosystem to fall in place.
Yeah. True.
Till those elements fall in place, tariffs on their own cannot help enhance the share of manufacturing in the GDP. Let me give you an example from a totally different perspective. We reduced or eliminated tariffs on close to 200 odd products in the IT hardware sector, pursuant to something called the Information Technology Agreement at the WTO. This was done between 2000 to 2005. When we started lowering the tariffs, the share of the domestic producers was about 70 to 75%. Within a few years after eliminating the tariffs, their share came down to about 25%. So when we lowered tariffs, eliminated tariffs, our producers could not withstand import competition.
So will that happen now? After we lower tariffs in this bilateral trade agreement, I'm sure manufacturing tariffs will be brought down substantially. Because if you seek protection in agriculture, Abhijit, it stands to reason that the US may put pressure on India to substantially lower on the other side, manufacturing. So what could be the impact?
Now, I am not very pessimistic for the very simple reason that given the manufacturing profile in US, there is not too much which US for the next 5 to 10 years can export to us in the industrial goods sector. Okay. So some people have been arguing, and I think rightly so, that India might not stand to lose much by lowering tariffs in the manufacturing sector, provided, and that's an important proviso, this is done exclusively with US. The moment we extend it on a non-discriminatory, most favored nation basis to rest of the world, then it will create a problem, particularly from China.
Okay, yeah. Yeah,
So
true.
that is one point we need to bear in mind. In a, nutshell, lowering tariffs with US on industrial products might not have that big a devastating impact as we saw in the case of information technology agreement in 2000s.
Okay, okay. And do you think, Abhijit, now this is more a kind of macroeconomic kind of uh, assessment. Do you think global investors, as also Indian domestic investors, will hold back their investments until the bilateral trade agreement with the US is fully, the outcome is fully known, which would be probably at the end of the year, post Diwali? So, do you think there'll be a lot of uncertainty in the next 5-6 months, which will prevent people from making investment decisions?
Uncertainty, yes, will be there. Whether that will get reflected in investment decisions at this juncture again is hard to say for the very simple reason that maybe the FTAs with UK and EU might get finalized in this interim period as well, and
Okay,
that could unleash a separate set of dynamics which
okay,
could have a favorable impact on investment. But honestly, given the fact that US may not have a large number of industrial products to sell to us,
yeah.
I don't see that our BTA negotiations really having that huge an impact on investments, particularly from US.
What
There
about
could be
EU?
other factors which might hold back investment.
What
EU,
about EU? EU, yeah.
EU again, we will have to see what the terms of the outcomes are. For example, if EU softens its stand on carbon taxes, that could be favorable for our investment climate. But if
Okay.
EU goes ahead with its carbon border adjustment measure CBAM,
Mhm.
then there could be problems in getting greenfield investment,
And
particularly
EU,
from the EU side.
yeah. Abhijit, EU is also insisting on. I read reports that European Union is also insisting on large-scale removal of non-tariff barriers, quality control orders, as I said earlier. Will that, if India removes those in our FTA negotiations with EU, what impact might that have on the manufacturing side?
On the QCO issue, the I have heard the concerns from a large number of players in our own domestic industry.
Okay,
So there is clearly a need to have a relook at many of these QCOs to see whether they are actually serving the policy objective for which they were put in place, and they are not merely being used as a protectionist tool to, let's say, shelter just a handful of
yeah,
big producers. So there really is a need to have a relook at some of the QCOs.
yeah, because there is a view, Abhijit, that whether you like it or not, India's political economy is so designed that all the big input producers, they have a lot of political clout. They contribute to political parties in a big way, and they are the ones who get protected much more than the producers of final products. So, as it happens, the final producer of finished products are mostly in the MSME sectors, and they are not so organized. And the big producers of inputs such as steel, aluminium, copper, you name it, petrochemicals, man-made fibers, they are the ones who have been getting undue protection throughout the Indian, policy making regime, whether this regime or the previous regime, much more this regime than the previous ones. So is that a legitimate concern that the finished products, uh, the those who make finished products, the smaller scale MSMEs are being discriminated against in Indian policy?
Okay, in what you've described is neatly captured in something called an inverted duty structure.
Yeah, inverted, exactly. Yeah. And I've been hearing, Abhijit, for the last some 25 years, I've been hearing every third budget will say India needs to correct its inverted duty structure. Nirmala Sitharaman said it in last year's budget also, the previous budgets also. Now, is it ever getting corrected? That's what my question is.
Well, I'm not in a position to give you an answer on the economy-wide basis, but certainly when the inverted duty structure has arisen from our FTA commitments, what
Yeah,
I hear from the industry, and I must confess I haven't done a detailed study on this, some segments appear to say that we are moving towards correction. Whether the correction has happened, that I
yeah,
think will remain to be seen.
yeah. And I mean, we've been moving for the last 30 years. So, one final question, Abhijit. India is not part of so far, any regional trade arrangement. In that sense, India has been fairly isolated in terms of regional and bilateral trade arrangements. You think India should reconsider joining RCEP? Because recently Niti Aayog had put out uh, some statement that India should perhaps reconsider joining RCEP. Where do you stand on that?
I'm very clear in my mind, Venu. India took the right decision not to join RCEP. We were in no position to face import competition from China in the manufactured sector, nor let's say some of the agri powerhouses, particularly in dairy and fruits from New Zealand and Australia.
Okay.
So, given that reality, and that reality hasn't changed from 2019 onwards, I think we
Okay.
did the right thing by not being part of RCEP.
Okay. So thank you very much, Abhijit, for talking to us today. You've really given us a lot of food for thought, given clarity on a lot of issues which were pain points for India, which might occur in the ongoing bilateral trade negotiations with the US, and let's see what happens. How India deals with United States negotiators, and more particularly with Donald Trump. Thank you, Abhijit.
Thank you, Venu, for having me on your program. It was a delight to discuss many of these burning issues of today. Thank you again.